Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I thought I would go ahead and do a part 2 to this series for the bench press because I just did a tutorial and I went ahead and left everything set up and set my bench up over here. These may come out on different days for you guys, but I'm doing them back to back. So what I'm doing here, I'm going to show you guys how to set this up for the bench press and why it's different than the squats. And you guys can see the squat tutorial and you can see how I hook the bands around, what I did to set everything up, because they're still laying on the ground from me having done the squats. Now, one of the problems you run into is going to be a range of motion, because what we want on bands, doesn't matter whether you're doing speed work, max work, whatever you're doing, you want just a tiny little bit of band tension at the bottom of the exercise. And you want it to be stretched pretty hard at the top. Now, fortunately for us, there's a range where the band stays near max tension. These bands don't just go only to, 25 pounds for the blues on each side, only at peak tension. They might actually hold that for an entire foot. They just have to be stretched. And there's sometimes when I measure them, sometimes you get to a certain point that it'll get up to 24 pounds and you got to pull it another foot to get to 25, right? So as soon as it gets good tension, it hits close to its peak. So you want just a hair of tension, and you want that tension to build up. So a lot of times we're reaching peak tension on that band at the midway point on a rep. So that's one reason that they pull harder again than chains. But what you're going to see when I take this blue band, what's the problem with the bench press? The bench is lower to the ground, right? We are closer to the ground than we are at the bottom of, say, a box squat, or at least most people are. Now, if you look here, at this point, there's barely any tension. And if you look at that relative to the bench, that's fine for someone like me. I've got a really thick back. Why does that matter? People say, doesn't chest matter? No, back matters more than chest thickness for that, because your arch is going to affect the chest more. But your back, if you have an extra 3 inches of thickness in your back here, you're going to be higher up off the bench. So the bottom of your range of motion, even if you're flat backed, even without an arch, is going to be 3 inches higher. You have a lot more to work with. So that's easy. But if you look here, I have no tension at that point. And if you look at that point, that's going to be, some people's bar path is going to be lower than that. They're still learning to arch. They don't have a thick back. And even the peak is only right here. Well, the squat, it was all the way up higher. So we have to do something about that. So we've got a couple of tricks as far as what we can do. If you guys remember before, you watched how I looped it all through. Well, one of the options that we have is to shorten this, because we can't really double it around. It won't work. So one option that we have, and I'll bring this over to you guys so you can see it a little bit better, what I'm doing here. You can take this, and again, see the squat tutorial to see how I hooked this up. You can pull this out. You can twist this a couple of times. That will take slack out. That will shorten the band. And as silly as that sounds, you're like, that's only going to be an inch. That inch might be all you need, right? And that could be true in many things in life. Sometimes we give a lot for an extra inch. So you can do it that way. That will shorten the band slightly. And particularly, it's the unstretched part of the band. So this actually counts for a lot more than the stretch. It adds more than an inch if you do the math on the stretching. So that's an option. And that's one thing we can do. And then to also bring it further, what else can we do? We can bring it further away. So if I put it, instead of right up against that, I move it, say, 3 or 4 inches away, what happens? Now I've created more distance. Now it's higher. Like, I've got a lot of tension even at this point. We've taken several inches out. Now, because of that angle, it's going to be really, really important that we put these on so that we don't slip off. We have a more aggressive angle. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Take this over. I'm going to flip it over twice. Loop it back through. And pick it up to make sure it pulls that difference through. Pull it back a couple inches, right? Get that on. Put the clamp on. And then we'll do the same thing with the reds. Got to move my chains over. So we do the same thing with the reds. take these, flip it a couple times. Pull it through. Lift this plate up to make sure I'm pulling that all the way over. All right. Pull the plate further back, hook it up. And notice again the angles I've got, I'm further away. All right, we're further away. And that's going to matter. So, same thing here. Loop this a couple times. Loop, loop. Pull it through. Make sure that's tight. Again, further away, so we change the angle because we're sliding it over. We're putting more angle, we're adding inches. Now, we've got a different degree of tension. In fact, we could take these over even further. Move them over a good 4 inches, right? Now we have more tension. So with the same bands that we had set up for the squat, that minor adjustment, we can go over and bench, and I'm gonna predict I'm gonna have a lot of tension at the bottom. All right, come over, get my arch set up. Yep, tension at the bottom, look at that. There's a lot there. So the thing that we've got to remember there when we're comparing the bands versus the squat, we have a different range of motion. And so if we have the exact same length of band that pulls to the same point on the bench press, even versus a box squat, we have, again, we're all the way here at lockout versus up here. That is over a foot of difference, okay? It's over a foot of difference on band stretch. Same thing at the bottom. When I sit down on the box, I sit down and the bar is still, you know, probably close to where it is right here, right? It's very, very similar, maybe a hair lower. And then, you know, versus being something down here. So again, what we really need to look at is you've got to look at the difference between the bottom more than anything. Because the top, as much as people say, oh, that range of motion matters a lot at the top, the bands are already stretched by that point. And what you find is sometimes that extra foot, even on a band set that's 50 pounds of total band, sometimes that extra foot really only makes 1 or 2 pounds difference when you measure them on a digital scale. So we're not as worried about that. It matters, but it's not as important as what's going on down here. And you also need to think in terms of the percentage of your range of motion that has a lot of stretch and a lot of band tension, right? Because the squat, yeah, you're gonna have a longer range of motion no matter what with peak band tension. But percentage-wise, your squat range of motion, unless you have really short arms and you can arch like crazy, in which it's going to be much, much, much smaller. But your squat at the bare minimum for average length people, average height people, is probably going to be twice. It's going to be at least twice the range of motion of your bench press, right? And that's probably going to be a bare minimum. In the cases of some people, depending upon levers, it could be 4 times as much range of motion. So when you think of it from that perspective, we don't necessarily need as long of a stroke to where we have the peak tension of the bands, but we do need to be thinking in terms of the bottom. And so when you get to the bottom of that bench, if you have slack in the bands, you're going to need to do whatever you can to shorten the length of that band, and you're not going to be able to double them over. It's not going to work. You end up breaking bands. You're going to end up with excessive amounts of tension on them, and you're going to actually end up with a point where you have peak tension even at the bottom when you try to do that. And so that's not going to work either as far as what we're trying to do with bands. But I've actually seen people mess with it that way and actually break bands on the bench press. By somebody, I mean me. This is me learning from my own mistakes and telling you guys that was a very, very, very long time ago, but I did absolutely do that because I did it double and hooked the thing on 2 ends and had it looped down to get those bands real tight. And I've snapped my red bands before. I've snapped a pair doing speed bench. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. Don't try to do it that way. So you need to just find a way to shorten it. And if you have to, even the plates or whatever you're using, bring them out a little further so you have more of an angle. And that will take some of the range of motion. It'll take some of it out and it'll balance everything back out the way that you want it. All right, so this is your fix. It's just that you have to find a way to get the band to have peak tension, or at least some tension. Not even the peak, mainly just some tension further down, because you're starting closer to the ground and closer to whatever you have it attached to in its plates in this case. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.